and welcome, and thanks for joining us in our Resilience Matters series. Today we're delighted to be joined by Roger Martin, co-founder of The Mindset Difference, who specialises in helping leaders to be their best regardless of the experiences they're facing. So welcome, Roger, great to see you.
Oh, thank you, Kathy and Alison. Thank you for inviting me. It's a real joy to be here.
We're looking forward to the conversation, Roger.
Exactly what I was going to say. I can't wait to hear what your insights into resilience and mindset. So for the purpose of our audience, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so like you, I actually qualified professionally as an accountant at a Chartered Institute of Management Accountants, CIMA for short. But I've been in the sort of leadership team, organizational development space since the mid 80s. So I have seen lots of things come and go in that time, from TQM to Lean to cognitive behavioral therapy to neuro-linguistic programming. And I guess I've been a student of all of that. I've always been curious about what really matters to leaders and teams when they're up against it. And often when, they are facing setbacks or difficulties of one kind or another, and their resilience is called on to help them see it through. And so that I've been a student of that, I think, across my career.
It's interesting you say student, but kind of that leap from being a management accountant into working on mindset. What made you make the change?
Yeah, it's a good question. I was working in what I could best describe as a demanding culture. Some would say a toxic culture that was run by a person who I won't name, but whose nickname was the Tyrant. And so a very conventional command and control male leader, and who would laud those who'd done well and lambast those who had not. And when I found I described myself being in the accounts function there as being involved in an ammunition factory in a war I didn't belong in, because I had grown men ringing me up saying, can I delay expenses or bring revenue forward so that their numbers were great and they would escape the wrath of the tyrant. And it occurred to me that this is absolutely no way to run a business. People were just in fear. I was in fear. I was a young father at the time. In a marriage that didn't last. So with a difficult work environment and a difficult home environment, myself suffered a lot with depression and too much drinking and all that goes with that. And came through therapy as a patient, and then got interested in the big, the great psychologists of our time, Jung and Freud and Adler and Skinner and all of those guys, and did a course in it, which not only helped me, but personally, but also informed the way I started to look at individuals in organizations. So that fueled my study, if you will, of the human condition, and especially in an organizational context.
Interesting. And I know we've had discussions around mindset and how you look at mindset in rewiring, if you like, change the way you're thinking in its current state rather than adding sort of like new disciplines onto that. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, so during the 90s, the 90s and noughties and the 10s, let's say, my practice was essentially about adding more knowledge into teams and leaders, whether it be a strategy model or a behavioral model of some kind, and with associated tools and techniques, with the assumption being that the more knowledge they acquire, the more likely it is they'll change their behavior in the work situation.
Mm.
But I found myself in evaluation calls 6 months after a 12-month program would end, and a conversation would go something like, "Oh, how are things, Kathy, after the course you're on?" And your response would often be, "Oh, it's awful." Oh, why? Well, we have a new boss, or your circumstances have changed, or the competitive environment is worse. We're being asked to do more with less. So those kinds of challenges were diminishing people's resilience, as it were. They were left in a state of non-well-being, not in a state of well-being where they could access their resilience. And I was left thinking, well, if you were applying what we taught you about personality differences through various psychometrics, or you were using the various strategy models that we covered on the course, or the way we covered conflict management, etc., you wouldn't be describing what's going on at the moment as awful. You'd be kind of getting through it. And then they're responsible. "Oh, Roger, what we covered on the course was so useful. It was really, really, really useful." But it dawned on me that useful isn't the same as transformative. It doesn't count when you're needing to bounce back from a setback, which is what I understand resilience to be. When you lose a pitch with a client, or a customer, your main customer on a project is giving you negative feedback, or a colleague isn't just up to the game, or a supplier is underperforming. In those moments when we tend to get emotionally hijacked and into a negative emotion, a lot of what we've learned previously isn't accessible to us at that point, because we forget it, or it doesn't seem relevant to these particular circumstances. So that was a tough lesson to learn, actually, if I'm quite frank, because I started to wonder whether what I'd been doing was really of much help. And I pivoted away. I pivoted into philosophy and neuroscience and down those avenues to try and answer the question, why do we experience life the way we do?
That is a big question, Roger.
Yeah, it is a big question. It's why does my mood go up and down? Why on one day can I have a dose of road rage when somebody cuts me up, and on another day be concerned for the driver that does that, because they might not only endanger their own life but somebody else's? So what is it that causes that variation? And that I found a very rich theme of study, which I'm still in. I'm still trying to understand that question for myself, but also helping others do the same. And it was from there I met my partner in the Mindset Difference, the other co-founder, which is Paul O'Connell. And we formed the Mindset Difference in 2016, in June 2016. So 6 years ago. And our mission in life is to help leaders and teams be at their best, irrespective of the circumstances they're facing. So inherent in that is a belief that we've all already got what we need to respond to difficult circumstances. The only thing that's in the way are the mindsets we live from, which we're often unaware of, that prevent us being creative, resilience, having well-being, being imaginative, listening well to one another, putting judgment to one side, letting curiosity to come to the fore. These are very human traits that are inaccessible to us when we're caught in just one way of thinking.
Yeah.
So when you dive into that a bit more, we help people realize for themselves that they're only ever experiencing the feeling of their thinking. If I unpack that, the way it looks to me is that we as humans aren't in control of the thoughts that come into our head. I mean, if you live in my head, I have erroneous thoughts pop in all the time. Okay, it's and that's not something I'm in control of. And I know that I'm not a meditator myself, but people who do deep level meditation will say they can see a thought arise and then see it, and then they can either pay attention to it or let it float away.
Mm.
So the only point of influence we've got is the meaning we attach to those thoughts, because it's that interplay between that meaning making and the feelings we have that determine how we respond, how we behave to situations. And it's by helping people, where I think we've had some success is helping people realize that for themselves. So I don't mean understand a concept and go and apply, but see in any moment that how you're feeling is linked to your thinking. And of course, it doesn't look that way, right? It looks the other way around. It looks, if I'm feeling angry because a colleague hasn't done what they said they were going to do, or, I'm feeling frustrated because a client has just given me some negative feedback about something, it looks like that anger or frustration is caused by that individual, those individuals. That's how it seems to us, because that's how we've been conditioned. But when we step away from that and we reflect on that, we see it's the thinking I'm doing about that colleague or that client that's creating that anger or that frustration.
Yeah.
So for some people, that can be a terrifying prospect, because it means I've now got to be responsible for how I can't blame anybody anymore. But it's also a very liberating idea, because it means that when our emotions go south rather than go north of calm and clear, then it opens up the possibility that we have more influence over when and how those negative emotions change than we give ourselves credit for.
Yeah.
And typically that movement, that shift in negative feeling, usually happens when we can see the thought patterns, the trains of thought, the mindsets, the biases, call them what you will, that we live from, but we were being unaware of. That's the case we're doing. So we often describe what we do as a subtractive, not an additional, not an additive approach, but a subtractive.
Yeah.
So if I contrast it with what I was doing before, which was adding models, knowledge, tools, techniques, which can be forgotten, what I'm now helping people do is notice the thinking habits that are unhelpful to them, and having them wonder whether they're true, whether they're applicable, whether they're helpful in situation X or situation Y. And of course, when they conclude they're not, what happens is they don't pay so much attention to them, so they subtract them. They take them out of circulation, as it were, which leaves mental space for new thinking to arise. And people then start experimenting with other ways forward. And when those new experiments start to show dividends and get results, then they repeat it and they do more. So this plays into the idea of helping individuals and teams be at their best, because it's what I'm saying is it's already within them. It's just that it's inaccessible because of our conditioning, the way we're brought up, the trains of thought we automatically get on in all innocence most often, and we're unaware of. By bringing that into awareness is the game changer.
Which is incredibly empowering, because what you're saying is that, it is all in here. It's just you can't see your amazing abilities because of the noise.
Exactly. And I guess it's hard. I mean, from my experience, and even with the coaching, I agree that you can decide how much power you give that thought and whether you're getting activated from it. But letting it go is quite a hard challenge. So even if you recognise, I noticed that, that's curious, that I noticed that this has happened, to stop and condition yourself to stop thinking like that, it's really quite difficult. You know, how do you help people to let that go?
Yeah, I mean, Paul and I have been crafting our practice at that over the last 6 years, and you know, we've gradually gotten better and better at it. But the elements to it that seem important to me is first of all to normalize the behavior that people, the behavior patterns that people are already in, right? So we work a lot in the construction sector, which has got a culture of being adversarial. You know, it's a very risky business, which no one wants to be left holding the baby should a risk emerge. So it doesn't lend itself to collaboration very often. And so people are often defensive, operating from a win-lose mindset, making sure they're not left holding the baby and somebody else, it's going to be somebody else's problem, not my problem. And so one aspect of our work is to normalize that. Well, of course you would, right? If you live in from a mindset of they're going to be, life is about a win-lose game, and I'm going to make sure I'm a winner, not a loser. Your behavior and your feelings will be consistent with that. That's quite normal. I can go there, you can go there, Alison, you can go there. We can all go there. So normalizing that is helpful because what it does is it says we're all human, and we needn't beat ourselves up for what's happened in the past, but we can also maybe recognize that what our collective experience to date has been doesn't necessarily guarantee that it's got to be the same going forward. That's the first thing. The second thing is we quieten minds down. So we typically we run what we call retreat-like workshops. Now, that doesn't mean there's a lot of meditation involved, and people have to make their own food and they're up at the crack of dawn and stuff. It doesn't mean that.
I was ready to sign up until you said that.
You're just describing my holiday there.
but we do find rooms to work in that have comfortable seats, and it creates a reflective space, not a typical conference room. And we spend a lot of time in the first couple of days saying to people, it's hard for the mind to see anything new and fresh if it's going at 10,000 miles an hour. So what we are explicitly going to do, we're going to have long lunch breaks. We're going to talk slowly. We're going to work in a very slow way, and by design, you know, it's part of the model. And people find that itchy and scratchy some of the time because they're used to going at 10,000. Just give me the answer. Just give me the answer.
Hard. Yeah.
So slowing down is an important part of the process. And then what we do is we invite people to look at the nature of thought, you know, how it arises in consciousness, and then the meaning making we do and how we can get caught up in certain things, certain ways of thinking, like life is a win-lose game, like, you know, the future, what Dan Kahneman calls negative bias, you know, where we look to the future and we think it's going to be bloody awful, and also we set up a self-fulfilling prophecy in a way that and we catastrophize about the future and then inadvertently go and live it out. But we do that in a way where people see those for themselves. They as I say, realize for themselves that, you know, people have all sorts of realizations, like, I'm always in a battle with myself. I'm always fighting against myself to be better or be tougher or be, and, you know, it just makes for so much unnecessary noise up here. It just gets in the way. So we have a lot of sessions where we have people share really what they've been noticing. And it's quite profound what happens to people, because they see that, you know, from a young age, maybe from a teacher at school or a parent, that they've been caught on one particular train of thought that's unhelpful to them, and seeing thought as a transient thing. It comes through us all of the time. It's like an energy flow coming through us, and that we have some influence over what we pay attention to and what we don't, gives them that influence. So, well, I don't need to take notice of what my dad's been telling me since I was 2 anymore. And I'm never going to make it in life. I mean, I love my dad to bits, but he had a way of showing his love for me by pointing out what I hadn't achieved rather than what I had achieved, which left me with my experience, my brother's experience of him. I got 2 brothers, but my middle brother's experience of him was, oh, he was fine. What's the problem? And my experience of him was, I've been left with this, I'm not good enough.
Yeah.
I can still have him on my shoulder now, thinking, doing this podcast, with Alison and Kathy, don't screw up, don't say they're nuts if you start talking about it. Now, if I pay attention to that, you would see a very unconfident, nervous Roger showing up, because I'm behaving in a way that's consistent with that negative voice I'm paying attention to. But when I don't, and I've learned not to, I can relax into it, go with the flow, answer your questions, and hopefully come over in a more coherent, centered way than would otherwise be the case. Now, that's not because it's me. That's true for all of us.
Mm.
That's true for anybody. And that's the work we do. And I love it. I just love doing it because I think it has profound impacts.
Yeah, and I'm just thinking about the people who are probably watching this, who might not have that luxury of slowing down, going to a lovely retreat with the comfy chairs. How can they, do you think, notice those scripts, the dad on the shoulder, the thing, they're not good enough that they're carrying around? How do you think someone on their own could notice and change that?
Well, they could read about it. I mean, this is a book that I often recommend to people. It's called Somebody Should Have Told Us.
Okay.
9 Truths for Living Well. And it's often my go-to book for beginners who are looking at this question of, why do I experience life the way I do? I noticed you've had other people on this podcast talking about Michael Neill's work.
Mm-hmm.
So Michael would be another go-to place. He's written Super Coach and The Inside Out Revolution and other books. So there's a genre of books that are loosely tied to the original work of a guy called Sid Banks, who introduced the world to the 3 principles of how experience forms. And Michael and Jack Pransky, this book, and Claire Diamond, many other writers have taken his insight and made them and written about them. So that would be one way people could start to explore this. One of the reasons for the retreat-like thing in a business world, because we tend to work with management and senior teams in businesses, is that those guys and gals' brains operate at such a fast pace. They haven't even got time to read a book.
Yeah.
And we know we've tried to do it in shorter periods of time. But we've just found that all in all, for a 4-day experience is sufficient to slow people down for the first 2.5 days. And then in the last day and a half, we come back to whatever their business challenge is that we were hired to work on in the first place. And what happens on the last day and a half is they start to look at the challenges they're up against from a completely different standpoint to where they were at the beginning. And that's when new ways forward pop up, new ideas arise, which they can never do whilst you're still looking at the problem from the same mindset you saw it before. You've got the you got many quotes, but the Einstein quote of, you know, it's a sign of insanity to keep on doing what you've always done and expect to get different results. Well, this kind of 4-day intervention is sufficient to interrupt people's normal way of looking at the world, such that they can go, blimey. You know, if I stopped thinking all my staff or all my subcontractors were lazy, and they're actually they actually want to do a good job, and there's much more I could do to help them out with that, and that looks true to me rather than where I've been up until this point, then I have options around how I could experiment with that and try out stuff with that would never have even occurred to me whilst I stayed in the mindset of these are lazy people and all they ever respond to is carrots and sticks.
You've just made me think of a place I used to go to. I know this is going to sound a bit random, but there's a little island off Malta called Gozo, and it has a ferry that is so slow to get from Malta to Gozo. And every time I used to go on that ferry from Malta to Gozo, I'd be sitting there going, why can it not go quicker? Why can't it go quick? And every time I went on the ferry going back, the speed was right, because I'd slowed down when I was in Gozo, because it's a very like calming place, and it is just one of those things. You just reminded me that's that speed thing where you go, come on, and you need an intervention of something, even if it's a 40-minute trip on a ferry, to slow down. And then, as you say, you can see the wood for the trees. You can actually really focus on what you want to focus on, rather than having everything else that's going around it. But that intervention is necessary, isn't it?
Exactly. We often call that slowing down to the pace of thought, because the neuroscience says we process something like 120 to 150,000 thoughts a day. So that's happening at such a rate, such a speed, that we're not aware of most of them. So we just feel the way we feel and do what we do without really having stopped to see how all that works. So it's impossible to change stuff you've always done I think without that slowing down, thinking, blimey, that's how it works. That's why I always do that. That's why whenever I go into the boss, I always feel nervous. I'm creating that nervousness because of the way I think about her or him. Blimey, I don't need to do that anymore. And then you get the behavioural change flow from there. You see, what I think organisations are interested in is I want behaviour change, and they think mistakenly think behaviour is a function of rules and procedures and incentives and objectives and strategies and plans and all that kind of stuff, that stuff is needed. But behavior change that's sustained, I think, comes when people look within a bit, go beneath the surface a bit, and start to see how there's a link between the mindsets they live in, the thinking that produces, the feelings those produce, and the behavior that flows from that. And it's only when you interrupt that sequence, people can start to show up to issues from a completely different standpoint to what they believed as being useful up until this point.
I couldn't agree more. And like you say, we're just that iceberg, and we just notice, like you say, we're feeling like this. And that's the bit we see, but there's so much that's driving that underneath. And amazing. And
it's fun down there. It needn't be.
It's fun. You just need to quieten the mind and notice. Is a couple of key things I've taken from that. And and it's fascinating. I know, Roger, we could literally talk for hours, and always really interesting to talk to you, and love hearing your insight. So thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
Oh no, we love it. And just the purposes of a network, obviously we do run Resilience Matters. If anybody has got anything interesting to share on resilience, we love to get different thoughts from different industries, different backgrounds. So please do get in touch if you would like to be part of that. I'll bring up our website now, and that's how you can get hold of us. And also on our website, we do have 101 ways to develop our mental strength. So again, go on the website, it's all free, and hopefully there's something for everybody. But until then, thank you, Roger, and we will catch up very soon.
Keep doing the good work, ladies. Keep doing the good work.
Thank you.
Thank you. See you later.
Bye now.